Hello, my name is Brian Bartlett. This is the GRT 750 99 Technology and Society class. I'm making a video report involving the operation and the technology of vacuum cleaners. Before I talk about vacuum cleaners directly, what existed before vacuum cleaners? People had to take their rugs, their furnishings outside. They would use things called carpet beaters to smack the dust out of them. Basically, they would hang a rug over a clothesline and hit it. You can imagine, looking at the picture here, that it was quite labor intensive. Carrying out a large heavy rug was difficult to do, and it tended to only happen once per year. Hence, you get the term spring cleaning. Wall-to-wall carpets, or carpets covering the entire floor that were fitted carpets, they weren't practical because you couldn't take them outside. You can imagine that households were quite a bit dirtier in this situation. The first bit of technology that was developed to solve this issue was push brooms. They basically were powered by the floor as they rolled along. They had brushes inside that would sweep the dust and the dirt and such into a little containment bin. They did pick up large items. They would pick up bits of paper and fluff and such. But as far as the actual dust, they weren't any good at picking it up. They just didn't have the capacity to pick that up, and it was a step in improvement, but it wasn't fully improved. A few attempts were made at making bellows systems to develop suction power to pick up more dust, but they were quite underpowered and they wouldn't do a very good job of picking up that dust. It's kind of interesting though, push brooms do exist to this day, and you can purchase them. Some of the newer, more modern designs do make use of battery power to generate more suction, pick up more dust and more items. In 1868, an individual by the name of Ivan McGaffey came up with a hand-powered vacuum that used a crank and a turbine. You would hold onto the vacuum with one hand, crank with the other hand, and it would develop a suction value that way. It was an improvement over the push broom. It was still underpowered. It still wouldn't pick up much dust, much dirt. Price tag on it was $25. In 1868, $25 was a lot of money, and it was a very difficult sell to individuals, especially considering its drawbacks. The real limiting factor of vacuum cleaners was power source. Electrical power wasn't very available yet. Gasoline engines were getting smaller and cheaper, and an individual by the name of John S. Thurman came up with the idea of using an air compressor that would generate compressed air and then use that to blow the dust out of the house. The limiting factor, the part that made this a hard sell for him, was that the dust would become airborne and would go everywhere. Then after it was airborne, it would settle back out onto all the furniture and stuff in the house. He did try to market this idea as a way to clean out rail cars, and another individual saw that and realized that wasn't going to work. But that other individual came up with an idea and an improvement on the system. We'll cover that in the next slide. Before that, I want to show you this video of compressed air, what it looks like, and kind of the limitations of it. Here you're seeing compressor and the engine that's powering it. That is a hit and miss style engine. They were available at that time, and this individual is using an air hose to blow that carpet out. As you can see though, as he goes to blow, the dust becomes really airborne, and if you were in a house, that would become problematic. Yes, you could still take the rug outside, but you're still only a mild step above taking it outside and beating it. Also, the compressors were kind of on the noisy side. People didn't like that. The story goes that Herbert Cecil Booth saw the carriage blowing demonstration and realized that it wasn't working. He came up with an experiment where he took a handkerchief, put it over the dirty arm of an armchair, and put his mouth up to it and sucked. That made the handkerchief dirty, and he realized that vacuum was the way to solve the problem. He came up with a service. Basically, it was a horse-drawn cart that would pull up to your house. They would unreel yards and yards of hosing, and then they would run those through the windows, and then individuals that were dressed in red outfits and uniforms would vacuum out your house. Supposedly it was a very noisy system, would scare horses that were on the street and such. The vacuums here were powered by the hit and miss style engines. Later versions that he had were powered by electric motors, but they were still very noisy systems. One of his claims to fame was that this system was to clean the Westminster Abbey right before King Edward VII's coronation. That was one thing that made it famous. This system was used for a while for cleaning out different royalty type systems. Next in the timeline of creation of a vacuum was the innovation that was created by James Spangler. James Spangler was a janitor, a custodian that worked at a department store. Every night he would have to sweep up and clean up carpets at that store. Spangler was an individual that suffered from asthma, and he believed that the dirt and such that he had to breathe every day as part of his job was a source of that asthma. It was the cause of that asthma. So, being a tinkerer and inventor at heart, he came up with an idea of creating a portable vacuum that could be used. He took an electric motor, built an impeller fan, had a box that was from a soap box, and was using a pillowcase as a dust bag to collect it. He got the design patented. It was working well. He had a difficult time in that he was 60 years old. He knew that he didn't have the capital to develop the idea. So he sold the idea. He sold his idea to another individual. That individual developed the design even further. The individual that Spangler sold his designs patents to was William Hoover. Hoover made several improvements upon it, came up with the Model Zero Hoover you see here. He sold his vacuums through retailers. Initially he had a difficult time selling them, so he offered free in-home trials. An individual could use the vacuum for a week, and then if they liked it, they were offered the chance to purchase it. Hoover is a name that is recognizable even to this day. Let's take a look inside the vacuum. When the dust-laden air comes into the vacuum, it first gets caught in the dust bag. The dust bag serves as a filter to remove the dust from the air. After the filter, it runs through the motor. The motor depends on the cooling of the air flowing through it. To keep the motor cooling, without that cooling, the motor would quickly overheat and burn itself up. After the motor, it runs through a fan impeller system. This system takes the airflow in, spins it up, adding velocity and spin to it. It moves through a fixed impeller system. This impeller system will remove the rotation but still keep the velocity of the fast airflow. In a two-stage fan, it'll run through another impeller that spins it up to a higher velocity, a higher suction value. And then it will run through another fixed impeller to take the rotation out of the air. From there, it comes out of the exhaust, comes out of a vent on the top of the vacuum cleaner. How have vacuum cleaners changed over the years? Initially, the form factor of the vacuum cleaner was a push-around style vacuum cleaner that you saw earlier. Hoover did come up with a can style vac that would place the vacuum on a canister and would make it a little more portable, that you didn't have to push the vacuum around. I believe the year on that was 1929. There was a shop vac that was created, basically placed the vacuum motor on top of a large barrel that would allow you to suck up a lot more material, a lot larger material. There was an invention of a handheld vacuum cleaner, made it more portable, made it easier to carry around. Beater bars were created. A beater bar is a hard bar that would smack the carpet. That would help knock dust out of the carpet, and it made the vacuums work a lot better. Multi-stage fans were created. These are fans that would increase the velocity, increase the amount of air that was moving through vacuum a lot more efficient. Impeller improvements were created. Some vacuums move the air dust mixture through an impeller, through the blower, before they separate out the dust using the dust bag. When you do that, and when you have that going on, an impeller can become broken pretty easily, and they had to come up with better and better impellers for that. Headlight was an innovation that was added to push vacs in 1932. Initially it was an optional. Quite a few vacuums it's a standard feature. Better and better filters were come up with. Basically they would allow a lot less dust to come through the filter. The first dust bags were pillowcases. Later and later, they got more efficient. Early vacuums were made primarily out of metal. They were heavy, they weighed a lot. They've brought weight down through the use of plastics, the use of different materials. Vacuums cost a lot less. Initially, vacuums were, they would cost a month's worth of pay, and it was quite an expensive purchase to buy. Now they're not so much. Vacuums are more stylish. A lot of time has been spent in making them look nice, making them look pretty, making them look like something that you'd want to have seen in your home. Vacuums have been made smaller. They don't take up as much space. Some more modern vacs fold up into to really compact sizes. And finally, portable vacuums have been created through the use of battery power. What materials can you expect to find in a vacuum? Vacuums have their outer case made of plastic, typically antibutylstyrene ABS plastic. You will find some polycarbonate and other plastics used, basically depending upon the needs, what the plastics have to do in the vacuum. Typically vacuums are using brushed motors. Brushed motors are able to develop more torque, more horsepower than a brushless type. Of course, there are cords and wires that go into it. You'll find the bag that serves as the filter for it. You will find the switch, power switch for turning it on and off. There are custom metal parts, namely the impellers and the fasteners that hold everything together. Some of the costs that go into making a vacuum are the cost of the materials, that is for the motor, for the raw parts, cables, the cord, tooling, in other words, the molds to make the plastic parts, jigs and fixtures to fold the metal up for different parts of the motor and making the impeller, the designing of the vacuum, the research and development that goes into making that vacuum, the R&D process itself, assembly, of course, of the vacuum, marketing that vacuum out to consumers, and then, of course, the cost of shipping and delivery to deliver the vacuum to the consumer. What are some of the social outcomes that we've seen with vacuums? What is the effect that they've had on society? Some would argue less housework, but I really don't agree with that. You think back to before vacuums existed, once a year typically they would do the spring cleaning where they carry the carpet outside and they would beat it out. People vacuum more often than once per year. I think where you see the most social outcome, houses are cleaner. Houses back in that time, they were quite dusty. You had covers that went over everything to protect them. Those are required less. Fitted carpets are practical now, so now you can have the wall-to-wall carpet in your house and know that you can keep that carpet clean, keep that carpet free of dust. Asthma sufferers, the amount of dust load that you find in a house is much less. That definitely eases the symptoms of asthma, and there's less disease. Several diseases are carried around in mouse droppings and such, and by vacuuming up and cleaning up that dust load, you're able to have less diseases. What are some of the disadvantages of the current design of vacuums? They still tend to be loud, in the order of 70 decibels. 70 decibels is the point at which human hearing is labeled as annoying. Many models still require changing the dust bag. There are bagless models on the market. Most of those models suffer as they pick up more and more dust and dirt. They lose their vacuum power. They don't become they're not as efficient. One disadvantage is that small particles of dust can pass through the filters. I have a video on that coming up in just a moment. They suffer from clogging. When you get a clog on the hose, the vacuum will no longer pick up the dust and the dirt that you're trying to pick up. Motors that are in vacuums, they depend on the air flowing through the vacuum, so if they get clogged and a person continues to vacuum, the motor can and will overheat. You can also have blower impeller damage. That's what you're seeing right here. This impeller right here had a bit of foreign material, penny that was vacuumed up or some other item, that when it hit that impeller, it cracked and broke that impeller. Now for that video. This individual you see here has a canister style vacuum. He also has a dye pack that generates smoke, like a smoke bomb, if you will. He's going to activate the smoke bomb. It will draw the smoke, which is very small particles of color, through the vacuum, through the filter bag, and you will see that the vacuum doesn't filter out all of the smoke particles. Quite a few of them make it through the vacuum. Typically about 15% of the dust in a house are dust particles too small to be picked up by a vacuum bag. Some improvements, in my opinion, that can happen to vacuums. Motor life. That's actually what kills a lot of vacuums, is the motor in them having the dust being drawn through the motor to act as cooling. It shortens the lifespan of that motor. Bags and bagless designs, if they can improve the bagless design to where it can pick up more particles and not require a filter, that would be excellent. Otherwise, just the bags themselves, allowing those particles to come through. Better filters. Some vacuums do feature a HEPA, high efficiency particulate filter that will remove a lot more of those smaller particles, but the HEPA filters do tend to get clogged themselves. Pick up a bit of debris, clogs the vacuum. That can be an improvement that needs to be solved. We are seeing robotic vacuums coming on the market now. Those vacuums need improvements themselves. Right now, most robotic vacuums are basically push brooms, like we talked about earlier in this presentation. Those push brooms suffer from the fact that they don't pick up nearly as much of the small dust particles. They're basically aimed at picking up large pieces of stuff. Robotic vacuums suffer from getting stranded and stuck. There are also some privacy concerns to be considered with robotic vacuums. Namely, a modern company has a mapping software that'll map out your house. They have announced just in the last 2 weeks that they are going to start selling that mapped out data of people's homes to other companies. And yeah, you can imagine why some people wouldn't like that. Here are sources. Here are more sources. I thank you very much for listening to this, and hopefully you learned some stuff.